Good morning, friends. Today I will be talking about the major themes of India's foreign policy. See, when we talk about foreign policy of a country like India, what we need to take into considerations that there are two dimensions. One dimension is what we call the macro level dimension, that is the general foreign policy, and then is the country specific dimension, what we call the India's foreign policy with a particular country. So foreign policy for any country including India would have two dimensions. One is the general dimension of the foreign policy, because the general content of the foreign policy would remain same for all the countries. But again, we need to understand one point very clearly, that for example, India's foreign policy with China may not work with India's foreign policy, or may not work with India's relationship with a country like United States of America. Because with every country, you have a different kind of relationship. So even though the general content of the foreign policy, the general principles of the foreign policy, the philosophical dimension of foreign policy may remain the same, but depending on the specific requirement of the two countries, depending on the specific strength and specific weakness of the two countries, the foreign policy, the bilateral dimension of the foreign policy may change from country to country. So we have a micro level foreign policy, what we call the country specific foreign policy, and then we have the macro level foreign policy. Macro level foreign policy is the general foreign policy, or which would include the philosophical aspect of the foreign policy, which would include the principles of the foreign policy. So we need to understand the difference between a country specific foreign policy and the general foreign policy. Now today I need to concentrate more on what we call the current themes of India's foreign policy. When I say current themes of India's foreign policy, what I have in mind, what is the contemporary foreign policy of India at the macro level? One point that you need to understand very clearly, that foreign policy is something which is a subject matter of both continuity and change. Why change? Because the circumstances have changed. Why change? Because environment had changed. Why change? Because requirement of the country had changed. Why change? Because there is a change in the balance of power position in the world. So because of all these reasons, foreign policy would not remain same for all the times to come. Let me give an example. For example, there was a time when we used to pursue a foreign policy, particularly in the economic context. It was called a foreign policy which need to give more emphasis on the economic interest of the countries. We had an inward-looking foreign policy. Inward-looking foreign policy means what? We were following a protectionist foreign policy. In order to protect our own industries, we were imposing huge level of duties on the goods and services being coming from across the world, in order to protect the interest of our own industries. For example, on electronic goods, there is a time when we used to impose 400 to 600% duties. On the foreign vehicles, we used to impose duties up to the level of 500%, 600%. Now, with adoption of the policy of liberalized economy, with the opening of our economy, with the emergence of globalization in the world, we were forced to open up our economy. So from protectionist foreign policy, from protectionist economic policy, we started a foreign policy, what was known a foreign policy, which was more suitable to what we call a policy of globalization, the policy of free trade. Means there are certain things, certain aspects of the foreign policy which would continue, and certain aspects of foreign policy would change. So that is why it is called foreign policy is something which is subject matter both of continuity and change. So when we talk about the major themes of India's foreign policy, the first important point I would like to highlight here is India's policy of non-alignment. We started with this foreign policy of non-alignment. Why we started a foreign policy of non-alignment? Because India never wanted to be a part of the two military blocs. After the Second World War, the world was divided into two major power blocs. In fact, the two major countries of the world which has fought the Second World War together, like Soviet Union and United States of America, after the end of the war, became arch enemies of each other, and the world was divided into two camps: the Soviet camp and then the US camp. And India, being a newly independent country and suffering from its own economic and other difficulties, could not have afforded to be a part of either of the power blocks of the world. So India started a policy of non-alignment along with certain other countries of the world. Means non-alignment should not be confused as a foreign policy of maintaining equidistance from the two power blocks. No, it is not. It should not also be understood as a foreign policy of neutrality, because in international relation you cannot be neutral, because you are neutral either in favor of someone or you are neutral against someone. Means our foreign policy of non-alignment was based on the interest of our own country. Means depending on the interest of the own country, we would like to have a relationship with both the worlds, with the Soviet world as well as the US world. But India's foreign policy of non-alignment initially was rejected by both the groups, the US group and the Soviet group. Why it was rejected? It was rejected because both these powers believed, they had thought, they had considered India to be a potential country for joining their bloc for their own reasons. US had thought India, being world's largest democracy, would become a natural partner with the world's oldest democracy. Soviet Union had thought that India, being a poor country, being a developing country, could become one of the potential countries for bringing about a revolution in India, the socialist revolution in India. So Soviet Union had thought India would be joining the Soviet bloc. So India's refusal to join both the blocs was not accepted by either of these powers. They believed that either you are with us or you are against us. Those who are not with us are against us. That was basically the logic of both United States of America and the Soviet Union. The foreign policy of non-alignment, which we had started after the end of the Second World War and India becoming independent, that policy of non-alignment could be said that it was a byproduct of the Cold War. Now a question is raised that when the Cold War is no longer there, the bipolarity was no longer there. From bipolarity, the world became a unipolar, and after that it became a multipolar world based on multi-alignment system. Now in this situation, what is the relevance of non-alignment? So that is why we talk about non-alignment 2.0. When we started with the policy of non-alignment, which was a reaction against the two power blocks, that could be described as non-alignment 1.0, and what we have today is non-alignment 2.0. Non-alignment 2.0, what we pursue today, is the concept of non-alignment 2.0 is primarily used to secure the relevance of our policy of non-alignment. What is non-alignment 2.0? Non-alignment 2.0 is a policy which gives you a strategic autonomy in deciding about the course of action of your foreign policy. For example, we have a good relationship with United States of America. In fact, we have a strategic relationship with United States of America today. But at the same time, we are also procuring S-400 missiles from Russia. Still, even now, India is procuring more than 60% of its military hardware from Russia. Means non-alignment 2.0 is a foreign policy which gives you strategic autonomy to maintain your relationship with both United States of America as well as Russia. At the same time, India is also maintaining a good relationship with China, even though we may have differences at various levels, but we continue to trade with China. We continue to have, recently we had the two informal summits with China. We also had an informal summit with Russia as well. Means a foreign policy which helps you in maintaining a good relationship, or we can also say maintaining you a balance of relationship with the different powers of the world, would be coming under the category of non-alignment 2.0. Now, come to the question of the second major theme of India's foreign policy, and that is continuation with the policy of Panchsheel. We started with the policy of Panchsheel. Panchsheel means 5 cornerstones so far as principles of India's foreign policy is concerned. We continue to follow those principles of Panchsheel, which was incorporated by Jawaharlal Nehru and was first experimented with India's relationship with China. In 1954, in fact, India had signed a Panchsheel agreement with China, though China did like what we call the stabbing in the back. Even though we had an agreement based on Panchsheel, India was attacked by China. What exactly is the policy of Panchsheel at the macro level, which we still continue to follow? See, it has certain core elements. For example, mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. We continue with that policy. Again, we talk about the second important point, a non-aggression policy of non-aggression against each other, policy of non-interference in the domestic affairs of each other's country, a policy of equal and mutual benefit, and a policy of peaceful coexistence. I mean, these are the 5 core themes of India's foreign policy of Panchsheel at the macro level, and we continue to follow that policy even now. The third major theme of India's foreign policy is India's what we call the neighborhood first foreign policy. Neighborhood first policy means our first priority is maintaining a good, stable relationship with our neighborhood countries. Whether it is Nepal, whether it is Sri Lanka, whether it is Bhutan, whether it is Maldives, India would pursue a foreign policy of what we call the neighborhood first foreign policy. Why? Because it is important that if you are not able to establish a good, stable relationship with your neighborhood countries, and when you are aiming to be a global power, your ability to be a global power would be questioned. Why? Because if you have not been able to maintain a good, stable relationship with your neighborhood countries. Because the route towards global leadership goes through your neighborhood countries. So first, you need to be a leader of your neighborhood countries. Only then you can dream of becoming a world leader or a global leader. So we are giving a lot of emphasis on the neighborhood first foreign policy. Particularly, it is quite unfortunate that despite India contributing a lot towards the development of all our neighborhood countries, our relationship with many of our neighborhood countries, whether we name it as Sri Lanka or Nepal, or Pakistan, we find that we do not have a good, stable relationship with our neighborhood countries. So for every government that comes to power, the first priority is to promote its neighborhood first policy. Neighborhood first policy. For example, 2014, when Narendra Modi became the Prime Minister of India, he invited all SAARC leaders to be the chief guest in his oath-taking ceremony. Why did we invite all the SAARC leaders, because we wanted to show it to them that is our priority is to improve our relationship with neighboring countries. Again, in 2019, the second oath-taking ceremony of Indian Prime Minister, all the BIMSTEC leaders were invited. So that shows that how much priority, whether we have been successful or not is a different question. But yes, this is the kind of priority which we are giving to India's foreign policy with our neighborhood countries. Now, the third dimension, I don't know whether it's third or fourth, I do not count. The third dimension of India's foreign policy is what we call the extended neighborhood policy. Is that now we have redefined our neighborhood. Now, it is not only the South Asian countries that are neighbors, now we have included in our neighborhood the countries of Southeast Asia, East Asia, and we are even going towards Pacific. So we have an extended neighborhood policy. Now, in extended neighborhood policy, we would be giving emphasis to India's relationship with ASEAN countries. We would be giving emphasis on what we call India's Actist policy. Earlier we had the Locust policy, and now we have been redefined as the Actist policy. So the third dimension is India's foreign policy, what is called the extended neighborhood policy. The fourth dimension of India's foreign policy at the macro level is shifting emphasis from political dimension of foreign policy to economic dimension of foreign policy. Because you see, foreign policy is nothing but an instrument for the fulfillment of your national interest. Now, since the advent of liberalized economy, we have started using foreign policy as a tool for promoting our economic interest. So, what we have in mind is the fact that now we have to give more emphasis on the economic dimension of the foreign policy. Means gradual shift from political diplomacy to economic diplomacy. Now, when we say economic diplomacy, two things in mind. One is diplomacy for economy, and another is economy for diplomacy. When we say diplomacy for economy, what is diplomacy for economy? Diplomacy for economy means we are using our foreign policy, we are using our diplomacy for building up and strengthening Indian economy. For example, we say, come and make in India program. Make in India program means we are inviting foreign collaborators to invest in India, to put up a plant under the joint venture, so that we are able to strengthen the manufacturing base of our own country. When we are calling for FDI investment, when we are calling for investment in different sectors like the defense, the insurance, real estate, means we are inviting foreign powers, foreign companies to invest in the crucial sectors of Indian economy. So this means when you are using your diplomacy, when you are using a foreign policy for building up and strengthening your economy, it is called diplomacy for economy. Now, come to another dimension, what is called the economy for diplomacy. Means, for example, India putting up a project in Sri Lanka, India putting up a project in Nepal, India investing its money in Afghanistan, Indian companies investing money in different parts of the world. Means we are using our economic prowess, we are using our economic strength, we are using our economic power in getting a foothold, diplomatic foothold and economic foothold in other economies of the world, other countries of the world. So that would be considered as what we call economy for diplomacy. So you are using your economic prowess to get a foothold in different countries of the world. So one important dimension of India's foreign policy is shifting base from political to economic diplomacy. Another important theme of India's foreign policy is that we are no longer remain contented, will no longer be remain contented with becoming a leader of developing countries. We are an ambitious country. India is not simply considering itself to be leader of developing countries. India wants to be a global leader. So we aspire to be a global leader. So yet another dimension, yet another theme of India's foreign policy, current theme of India's foreign policy is that we want to be a global leader. We want India, we want India to be a leader of the we want India to be considered as one of the major powers of the world, like US, like Russia, like China. You know. So making India a global power, or the other sentence that we can use is securing India a global position, securing India a suitable position in the world, in the world's power structure. That is yet another theme of India's foreign policy. Now we have seen that it's no longer a world what we call a bipolar world. It's no longer even a unipolar world. Today we are living an era of multipolarity, a multipolar world based on multi-alignment. A country having relationship with different countries of the world, it is an era of multilateralism. So, yet another theme of India's foreign policy is shifting emphasis, making India's foreign policy more credible. So, shifting emphasis from non-alignment to multi-alignment. Because in today's world, the balance of power could well be maintained by pursuing a foreign policy which strengthens multipolarity in the world. So that is why we have shifted a foreign policy, we are shifting our foreign policy gradually from non-alignment to multi-alignment. Again, we are no longer living in an era of idealism. You know, when Nehruji started a policy of non-alignment, it was considered as a foreign policy of idealism. You know. Since there has been a lot of change in the world after the Second World War, many countries have become nuclear powers. Many countries have strengthened their economy. Many countries have occupied a more influential position in the world. For example, after the Second World War, now we have a G4. G4 means 4 major powers of the world, apart from the 5 major powers who are the permanent members of the UN Security Council. We have the G4 countries, Brazil, Japan, Germany, and India. So, we have shifted the theme of our foreign policy from idealism to pragmatism. We have made our foreign policy more pragmatic today. Pragmatic means more realistic, shifting emphasis from non-alignment to multi-alignment, shifting emphasis from political diplomacy to economic diplomacy. All these could be considered as examples of, you know, shifting India's foreign policy from idealism to pragmatism. One more example here I would like to give when we say that we have shifted our emphasis from idealism to pragmatism. For example, a country like Israel, you know, Israel became independent in 1948. We started diplomatic relationship with Israel when we opened up an embassy in Tel Aviv in 1992. Earlier, we were pursuing a foreign policy, what was called a foreign policy of hyphenation. Now, we were making a distinction between Israel and Palestine. Why we did not have a good relationship with Israel? Because we were perceiving that if we develop a good relationship with Israel, the Arab world, which were at the loggerheads with Israel, they would be feeling offended. So our policy of promoting the goal of autonomy of Palestinians prevented us from having a good relationship with Israel. You know. Now what has happened is we have now dehyphenated our foreign policy. The hyphen is no longer there. Dehyphenated foreign policy means our relationship with Israel would no longer be dependent on our relations with Palestinians. We are now pursuing a foreign policy which gives us liberty of maintaining a good relationship with both Israel and Palestinians. So we have now dehyphenated our foreign policy. So we moved from a hyphenated foreign policy to a dehyphenated foreign policy. Then yet another thing of India's foreign policy today is doing away with self-imposed restriction. Now this doing away with the self-imposed restrictions should be considered in context of the hyphenated and dehyphenated foreign policy. That we had imposed certain restrictions, and that was self-imposed restrictions, which did not allow us to pursue independent foreign policy. We thought that if we are supporting the Palestinians, we cannot have good relations with Israel. Again, we thought if Soviet Union or Russia is our established partner, we cannot have a good relationship with Americans. Now what has happened? Now we are having a good relationship with both United States of America as well as with Russia. You know. This means we have now learned to maintain a balance in our relationship with different countries of the world. So this self-imposed restriction which had imposed on foreign policy is no longer relevant. One more important point, that we are pursuing now what is called the smart power diplomacy. You see, there are three kinds of power, what we call the hard power, that is the military power, the soft power, and then the smart power. Soft power is, what is soft power? The soft power is a country which is friend of all the countries of the world, a friend of all, an enemy of none. What makes India a soft power is India's acceptance by all countries of the world. What is the reason of that acceptance? Maybe the strength of your own country. India's recognition as a major power in the world without India becoming an economic and military power is what is called the soft power. For example, Bollywood, the popularity of Bollywood films all across the world. Again, to give another example, India being accepted as a land of meditation all over the world. Yoga, crucial role which India played in acceptance of 21st June as the International Yoga Day by the UN. Means Australian Prime Minister Talbot, which was in India 2 years back, he was asked a question by the media people that why do you consider India to be a soft power, major soft power? You know what is his reply? He said that India is a major soft power in the world because India is friend of all and enemy of none. That kind of image, that kind of perception, that kind of global acceptance of India, without becoming a major military power, without becoming a major economic power, India was accepted as a major power of the world. That is what is called soft power. So you have the soft power and you have the hard power. But now what I'm trying to put forth is the point that we are now pursuing a smart power diplomacy. Means Smart power is a good combination of both hard power as well as the soft power. Because in today's world, in today's competitive world, if you pursue only a soft power, that may not succeed. You know. So you have to pursue a smart power diplomacy, which means a good mix of both soft power as the hard power. For example, we have started using our strength. We have started using our economic strength. We have started using our military strength. We did a surgical strike against Pakistan, which I had never done until now. Surgical strike against Pakistan, we have done. Not once, twice we have done surgical strike. Again, the kind of freedom that we have, the kind of autonomy that we have. So on the one hand, we have signed a strategic partnership with the United States of America. We have a LEMO agreement, we have the Comcast agreement, but at the same time, we are also procuring S-400 missiles from Russia. You know, so India has become a smart power. You know, we have learned to use both the hard power and soft power simultaneously, making India a smart power. Then there is a foreign policy, what we call foreign policy of engagement and isolation. And this is a foreign policy which works more in case of Pakistan. Policy of engagement and isolation. Engagement and isolation means what? On the one hand, we are trying to negotiate peace with Pakistan. We are trying to develop a kind of workable relationship with Pakistan, what is called policy of engagement. But at the same time, we are pursuing a foreign policy under which we are trying to isolate Pakistan internationally because of the support it provides for terrorism. We are considering Pakistan as an originator of what you call the export of terrorism in the world. You know. So on the one hand, we are engaging with Pakistan, but at the same time, we are also trying to isolate Pakistan internationally at various global forums because of its support to terrorism. So policy of engagement and isolation working simultaneously. Yet another dimension, or you can say the other core theme of India's foreign policy, is using diaspora as a foreign policy tool. Now we have started using diaspora. What is diaspora? Diaspora is people of Indian origin living in different parts of the world. We have about more than 30 million Indians living in different parts of the world. Taking example of the United States of America, 30% of the doctors in the US, they are Indians. The IT sector, the software sector in US is managed and controlled by the majority of engineers who are from India, software engineers who are from India. Means Indian diasporas have become an important tool in the growth of economy of different countries of the world. Now what we are doing is, we are not trying to attract those diasporas through our different foreign policy, tool, for investing in India, for developing more closer tie-up with India. We are using our diaspora, we are promoting them as India's ambassador in different countries of the world. Our emphasis on developing more close relations with the diaspora has helped India in promoting its bilateral relationship with various countries of the world. So yet another theme of India's foreign policy is, what we call is giving more emphasis on the diaspora, or we have started using diaspora as a foreign policy tool. Thank you. The rest of the themes of the foreign policy will be discussed in the next lecture.